Welcome to another episode of Field of Screams podcast. Today we'll be talking about Del Toro's Frankenstein. Now recently we just had Robert Eggers complete Nosferatu. Now we have Del Toro doing Frankenstein, and now there's Robert Eggers doing his new movie Werewolf. It's kind of cool. It seems like we got these really good, really talented directors creating movies for classic monsters. I really enjoyed Nosferatu, and I feel like it set the bar very, very high. But I've also liked Del Toro's movies. I was excited to see what he's done. Everyone knows Frankenstein. So I was curious to see how this movie goes. Now, there are a lot of movies that cover Frankenstein. There's different variations. I know there's a Bride of Frankenstein. There's just regular Frankenstein. There's just a very high number of films, some recent, some way far back. And I got looking at it because I was like, oh, I know the story of Frankenstein. And I was looking through the movies. And to be honest, I have never watched a Frankenstein movie. What I have done, though, is way back in middle school, I picked up the actual Frankenstein book. Now, granted, I was in middle school, so I can't tell you what variation it is or if there was some interpretation or, just different variation of it. But I just know I've read the story of Frankenstein, so I am familiar in that way. Now, from what I recall, the one thing I was shocked about when I read the book is because you see Frankenstein everywhere, so I assumed at the time when I read it when I was a lot younger that Frankenstein would be this evil monster right from the beginning, and the story ended up not being that way. It ended up being that the Dr. Frankenstein was kind of a little bit evil himself. He was at fault. I don't know if I'd really call him evil in the book. And the actual monster in the story Frankenstein, he starts off kind of innocent or naive. And then some of the outside influences of the world kind of turn him into a monster, in terms of personality. And then there's a big confrontation at the end of the book. And those were the aspects that I remembered in terms of, how they were as characters. I remember the characters were very gray when I read the book. And I thought that was really interesting whenever I read it. It kind of pulled me in. I was like, oh, that was awesome. It's not just a typical monster movie. I did recognize some of the paces of the movie. When the movie starts off with the people on the ship finding Dr. Frankenstein, and then they kind of stumble upon the monster. I do remember that section in the book. So I was like, okay, he is going off the book. That's cool. But as the movie went, I was like, well, I think he's changed some things. But I will say, as I first started, I was like, well, the number one thing that Del Toro has to do well, because, again, Robert Eggers set the bar high with Nosferatu, is the movie has to look good. And I think, for the most part, Del Toro does do a good job with that. There's a lot of vibrant colors. The scenes are set up beautifully. If there was one criticism that I could say about visually is there's some parts where the CGI is pretty heavy. Whenever they light the castle on fire and it's exploding, I feel like the fire and the explosion, you can definitely tell it's CGI. The animals in this movie, the wolves and the deer, again, you could tell it's CGI. And I understand there's not a lot of wolf actors or deer actors, but I feel like Nosferatu did a better job when it came to dealing with the wilderness and how realistic it looked. Those animals looked a lot better, in my opinion. Now, I did like the casting for this film. I was actually surprised that Mia Goth was in this film. The girl from X or Pearl, or, she's in a lot of other pretty good movies. She's a great actress. And when I saw her, I was like, oh, no way, she's in this. And she was actually, I didn't catch it. She plays the romantic interest of Dr. Frankenstein's brother, William. But she also played Dr. Frankenstein's mother in the very beginning, and I did not even catch that. I was like, oh, wow, she was her too. So that was a cool little thing they had going there. Now, the most important thing of this movie, and I think it's the big differentiation on whether you love this movie or if you don't like this movie, is the actual story and kind of how it molded and how the directions it took. I think that's the big factor here, because I do not think it stayed 100% loyal to the book. I believe in the book, Elizabeth, who's Mia Goth's character, she's the romantic interest of Dr. Frankenstein himself. Compared to this movie, she's the romantic interest to Dr. Frankenstein's brother, which was kind of an interesting conflict they set up. Now, the very beginning of this film, they do a great job of kind of world building. You see Dr. Frankenstein as a kid, and you meet his father, who is Father Lannister from Game of Thrones, which, again, the dude plays that role so well. But the father is rather abusive. He pushes Dr. Frankenstein. I'm just going to call him that. I think it's Victor Frankenstein. I'll just call him Dr. Frankenstein, though. But as a child, he pushes him to the limit to make him an even better surgeon than what he is himself. But again, he's rather abusive. Like, there's a part to where Victor Frankenstein messes up and he pulls out like this little device to punish him. And Victor holds out his hand and the father goes, no, your hands are way too important, and then hits him in the face with it. And it's like, oh, I guess, you couldn't just hit him in the behind like most parents. Instead, you had to go for the face. So right away, you're like, oh, he's getting abused as a child. And it talks about how Victor struggles with death, and it's going through all this messaging. But I like the build up to where, it's showing him now as an adult, and he's striving to find the cure to death, because the death of his mother and probably his father right after, it kind of haunted him. He felt like his brother was always the happy child. He felt like the angry child. It set up a really interesting premise, and I was totally in. And then as the movie goes, it shows him, trying to build this machine. He's doing inner politics to get funding for this machine. They buy the castle. There's a war going on, and they're collecting bodies to experiment with. He's going to public hangings, and finding the correct body. All that stuff was a lot of fun. It was interesting. And I was like, yeah, they're not leaving any detail left behind. It's doing a great job. Eventually he creates the monster. And when he creates the monster, it set up this kind of interesting premise of where the monster is really struggling to speak. And it reminds me of a very small child with a disability of speaking. And I think maybe the story kind of hints at that, and I was just too young to even notice. But right away, you feel a lot of pity for the monster. All he can say is Victor. That's how I remember his name, because constantly in the movie he's like, Victor. And when he becomes even more angry, he's screaming it. But that's the only thing he can say. And Victor is completely compulsed by this monster. He has him chained up, way downstairs in the basement. He's being very cruel to him, like his father was to him. And I was like, oh man, they're making Victor go really hard here. He's hitting him with the punishing device, the same device that his father used on him. And it's just going full throttle. Now, Elizabeth, which I believe is Mia Goth's character's name, she's actually the one that's compassionate towards the monster. And I feel like that was a little different also. I don't know in the book, I can't recall if Elizabeth actually had an interaction with the monster, but I just remember it didn't end so well for Elizabeth with the monster. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is different. Where's this going? Now, there's a part in this movie to where I start reaching a crossroads in terms of I go from loving this story to, oh, they're making that decision. Well, I wonder how that's going to pay off in the end. It just kept building up for me. So I already described how Victor was very abusive towards the monster, which, during the time of it happening, I'm like, okay, fine. They're going to find a good way to resolve this. But then Victor, he blames the death of another guy on the monster, tells his brother and he actually tells his brother not to tell Elizabeth, but blames the death totally on the monster. So William, he hates the monster, and he's like, oh, that is terrifying. He goes downstairs to where the monster's chained up, and you can tell this monster just wants some compassion. Again, you feel very bad for it. Victor says, say another word besides Victor, and I will let you go. I won't light you on fire. Yes, he's literally dousing the monster with gasoline. He's just going to burn this whole place down. He's like, but if you say one word, I won't do it. And then the monster sits there and goes, Elizabeth. And Victor just kind of like looks up and lights the whole place on fire anyways, tries to kill it. Now, this doesn't even mention the fact that Victor was trying to steal his brother's soon-to-be wife away from him, Elizabeth, Mia Goth. Like, he's like flirting with her, like trying to pull her in, and like she's like partially flirting back. It just feels very icky on Victor's part. And when it comes time to where he's literally lighting the entire castle on fire to kill the monster, because in the book he just runs away. Like, he's scared of the monster, he doesn't know how to act, he just runs away from his problems. But here he literally is trying to light it on fire. Now, at this point of the movie, I was like, I remember from the book that Victor was a very gray character. Now, this movie, Victor isn't so gray. There's really not a lot of good things going for him. It's kind of hard to root for Victor at this point. And the movie doesn't do itself any favors. The only time the monster shows any scary, abusive tendencies is when Victor is literally abusing it with this big steel rod, and the monster grabs it and like bends it, and that scares Victor, and he's like, oh my god, we gotta kill it. So it's like, you can't even kind of sympathize with him that the monster itself is scary. Instead, we get to see the perspective of the monster traveling in the woods, finding a family, sees that they love each other, it wishing that it had that love. It's building like pillars and stuff for the family and its yard, which, by the way, when the monster is like building all this different things for the family and they're walking outside and they're like, how did this get here? Must be like the spirit of the woods. And they just like kind of laugh it off. And I was like, no, I'd be a little creeped out. Like, who's building stuff in my yard? Like, I'd be looking for answers right away. But this family, they just don't care. Eventually, a lot of them go on a hunting trip, and there's this old blind guy, and he doesn't see how, it's weird, the design of the monster. Like, in a way, like, it is grotesque, but also in a way, like, it looks very cool and unique. If I saw it standing in the woods by itself, I probably might be a little afraid of it. But at the same time, like, it looks really cool. So they do a good job of like making it ugly enough to like scare people in the movie. Because, you don't want like a Robert Pattinson walking around. Like, no one would be scared of that. Instead you got this like monster. But the monster's like, it looks cool. So again, you sympathize with it even more. It's like, man, like this dude's like this hulking figure and can move really fast, and it cares a lot for people. And, and by the time you hit that movie, you're just feeling completely for the monster. And the monster befriends this like blind old man. And then the blind old man, okay. So there's a bunch of wolves that like attack the house and like completely murder the blind old man. And then the rest of the family returns and think that the monster commits it. So they start like shooting him. And another weird thing is Frankenstein can not Frankenstein, that's a scientist. The monster can regenerate, which is like a detail like they kind of like threw in. I don't think it was like that in the book. But they put that in there, and I guess like it does kind of serve a purpose, because it gives more ways of people can abuse the monster, and you can feel even more bad for it. Because they like shoot up the monster, like they should like shoot him with a shotgun. I mean, this monster is perfectly capable of murdering the family, and one of the people he does. But they just like shoot him with a shotgun, and he's like laying in the snow in pain, and then he regenerates, and he's like, I can't even die right. So then the next scene, like, we cut to William and Elizabeth's wedding, and during all this time to where the monster's traveling around and finally befriends the old blind man, and like, he's literally so nice. I would say he's almost like Snow White. I mean, there's even a scene where he squats down and he talks to a deer. Just like Snow White or Cinderella, whatever fairy tale that was. Like, literally, like, this monster has no faults in this movie. So Victor, meanwhile, got hurt from catching the castle on fire, had to get a prosthetic leg, and basically William is like taking care of him all this time. Now it's William's wedding day, and Victor's like just walking around like, oh, I want to congratulate you, William. And then he walks up to Elizabeth on her wedding day. And he's like, oh, I just want you to know that, I know I liked you. And I tried to flirt and, like seduce you and try to pull you in his mind. But now I see you as what you are. You are my brothers now. And she just like kind of looks at him, and I think she slaps him and tells him to get out of the room, which I don't blame her. But as I'm watching like this whole wedding scene go down, I'm like, Victor's just irredeemable by this point. Like, there is nothing good about Victor. The monster shows up and asks Victor if he can make a woman or a counterpart so that he can experience love and have someone to talk to who won't find him hideous because everyone runs away from him. And of course, Victor shuts him down, and Elizabeth walks into the room, and Victor pulls out a gun to shoot the monster and accidentally shoots Elizabeth, which now she's dying. And what does Victor do? He blames the monster. So this is the second death that Victor is blaming on the monster now. During the mayhem of all this, Victor's brother William, he like hits his head and he starts to die. And Victor runs over and he's like, William, my brother. And this part just kind of made me laugh because William looks at him and goes, Victor, all this time I've been terrified of you. You're the monster. And I just kind of sat there, which he's not wrong. But he's not watching this movie with us. All these horrible and awful details that I've been talking about with Victor, William wasn't really around to know this. The only thing that Victor could have done that scared him was create the monster in the first place, which maybe is what he's alluding to. I know he talked about in the childhood, like he was kind of the dark child and William was the happy child, but I'm pretty sure there's a part to where like they kind of moved away from each other, so how would he even know that? The times to where Victor tried stealing his wife, he didn't have any idea of that. The one guy dying, Victor blamed the monster, so he should be afraid of the monster. Victor shooting Elizabeth, he blamed the monster, so William should blame the monster. Victor abusing the monster, William never saw that. So I don't know, like the whole line of him calling Victor the monster, it was very theatrical. But like in my head, I'm just like, why would William even say that? Like he would not say that during this scene. And it just kind of blew my mind that it happened. Now, after this point, there's a big chase scene. Victor buys like 10 sticks of dynamite. He later comes across the monster. The monster's like, oh, will this finally kill me? And he gives him one stick of dynamite, and then he lights it and runs away and, tries to blow up the monster, and it doesn't work. And if I were him, if I really wanted to end the monster, I'd be like, listen, hold all 10 of these. We're going to light all 10. If you're going to buy 10 sticks of dynamite, use all 10 sticks. But I digress. It should have worked. It didn't because the monster regenerates. Now, in this movie, we get two perspectives. We get the perspective of Victor, and then we get the perspective of the monster halfway through. This happens because they're on the ship, and Victor starts off telling his story, and then the monster ends up breaking onto the ship, and then the monster wants to tell his side of the story. Here's the part where I found it just kind of funny. In the very beginning, they find Victor, and then the monster shows up. And when the monster shows up, like they get into this big conflict. The monster like snaps like 20 dudes in half. All the like sailors / soldiers, they're firing guns at the monster. He's regenerating, freaking out, going, Victor! Like really scary. Eventually they pull out this like really powerful gun. I forget what the dude even calls it. He's like, get the Wonder Waffle, and breaks the ice out from underneath the monster. Monster goes down in the water. We spend half the movie listening to Victor. And then halfway through, they kept like teasing it. Like you'd hear like guys yelling outside the door, and then like they would look, and it's just like one of the like sailors, like, oh, sorry, Captain. But eventually it gets to the halfway point, and the monster actually like breaks through. Like he like charges through the ship, and he bursts through the door, and he wants to kill Victor. And then the captain of the ship is like, oh, I was just listening to Victor's story. And the monster's like, oh, Victor's story? How about you hear my side of the story? And in my head, I'm like, there's no way that they're going to let this monster tell his side of the story. after they just had this big gunfight. They're like blowing holes through this monster. The monster is like scary as can be, especially with the cloak and yelling Victor. Like instead they all like sit on the bed and like, oh, let's hear the monster side. That I found very silly too. By the time we reach the end of both of their stories and we have our conclusion where Victor's on his deathbed and the monster is standing like right above him and they both heard each other's stories, in my head I'm like, there's only one way this movie should end, and it's with the monster punching a hole through Victor's chest, ending his life and then marching off and trying to find some way to live. I'm pretty sure in the book, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure Victor dies. The monster feels awful and decides to go light himself on fire at the North Pole. I'm pretty sure it's a pretty dark ending. But, I get it, Del Toro wanted a brighter ending, a more optimistic ending. And what really aggravated me is after everything that Victor did, they tell each other stories, and Victor starts doing this, oh, my boy, I feel so bad, my boy. And then the monster's like, it's okay, Dad. And then Victor's like, listen, I want you to do one thing. Live! And the monster's like, I will, Dad. And then Victor dies and the monster like walks off into the sunset. While they were doing the entire dialogue thing, I was just like, this is stupid. Like, Victor has no place in the world to be acting like a grief-stricken father. Like, oh, I realized I was abusive now that I'm on my deathbed. Like, no one should care. The monster shouldn't care. I just thought that was just a very dumb way to wrap it all up. If the ending would have been a little bit different, if the monster just would have ended Victor, I would have been very happy. But I know that's probably not what the intended ending's purpose was supposed to be. But, again, like, I don't have abusive parents. I don't even have abusive aunts and uncles. But, I think everyone has family members that they don't really get along with. But, let's just say, let's not even go the father route. Let's say you have an abusive uncle and they spend their entire life trying to ruin your life. And then while they're on their deathbed, they start going, oh, my nephew, live your life. And they start doing all this stuff. I'm not going to sit there and go like, oh, man, you know what? You were an okay uncle. Thanks for the advice. No, I'm going to be like, screw off, man. Like, you had so many years to make this better, and you did not do your part. That's how I felt towards Victor. I'm like, Victor, you were a total slime ball this entire movie. Don't give advice. Do not give advice. Now, I'm hammering Victor's character pretty hard here. One thing I will say, I do wish they would have made Victor a little more gray of a character. And when I say gray, if I'm correct on the book that he ran away after he made the monster, I think that's a lot more understandable. Chaining him underground and like beating him, trying to make him talk, that doesn't really give you the perspective of him. And I think they intentionally made the design to make his character abusive. And I don't understand, like, if you're going to create that arc, like, why do you have the end that you have? Instead, if you made him a little more gray and you made the monster a little more gray, I'm pretty sure there's a scene in the book, and again, I could be wrong because it was in middle school, but there's like a part where like a little girl's like playing by a pond or a body of water, and the monster like walks up, and he's like so naive and he doesn't know any better, and I think he accidentally drowns her, or like the people think that he's drowning her or something, like just some degree. And eventually like the monster gets so fed up with everyone calling him hideous and ugly and running away or trying to attack him, the monster does start to fight back, and I believe the monster does kill Elizabeth, who is Victor's wife, in terms of revenge, because Victor won't give him a wife. That stuff makes him gray. There's ways you could have evened the score a little more. You didn't have to make the monster Jesus. And you didn't have to make Victor, just this total slime ball of a character. If they were just a little more gray, I think you could have pulled this ending off. But instead, having it just so lopsided, I was like by the end of it, I'm just kind of laughing. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, this should not be going on. Now, the movie overall, like, it's not a terrible movie. It's really not. I'm harping on it because it's just a gigantic thing that's nonsensical to me, and I think it pulls back a rather great movie. Again, a lot of the visuals are pretty good. I think Nosferatu was better visually, but that movie's hard to match up to. Other than the CGI, like everything was beautiful, vibrant colors. I liked it a lot. I felt like the color scheme was intentional. There was a lot of deep symbolism in it. I don't know. Like, it's not like he did a bad job creating the film. I was just questioning, the overall plot and and the decisions that the characters made, and like just getting to the ending. Like, I didn't understand why we had to do that. If you're gonna go and make Victor this awful, awful person, I think the ending should kind of atone for that. So yeah, before I go on any more rants about Victor, I'll just kind of wrap it up here. This has been my review of Frankenstein. I did enjoy watching it, but again, I was just puzzled over that whole thing I just went on a rant about. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully, if you're still listening, you enjoyed what you've heard. You could always give this video a like, get it out to other people. Feel free to subscribe so that you know when the next one's coming out. And again, thank you so much for listening, and until next time.